We're going to have a little look at blood pressure regulation today. So, what is blood pressure? Well, it's a really important physiological parameter that that's helping to look at the insight into the health of your cardiovascular system as a whole. And what is it? Well, it's the pressure or the force exerted by that blood against the walls of your arteries. And when we think of it, you've got two numbers, and you can see the two numbers in our little image here, 120/80. And the 120, that's the systolic pressure, so the top one, and that is the pressure in the arteries when the heart contracts. So when your left ventricle contracts, it pumps blood into the aorta and into the big arteries, and that, when we measure that pressure, that is that systolic pressure. So that's on average, it'll be about 120 millimeters of mercury in health. Then your diastolic pressure is the pressure in the arteries when the heart is at rest. So in other words, think about systolic pressure. That's when your heart contracts and you get all this pressure, this blood pumping into the arteries. And then as the arteries have expanded out, they recoil because they've got a nice elastic tissue. They recoil, and that squeeze allows the blood to keep pumping or keep passing through your blood vessels. And as that pressure reduces, that's your diastolic pressure when it hits that minimum level. And so that's the arteries when the heart is at rest and the blood pressure in the arteries is at its minimum. And so in this one, you can see it's at 80. So 120/80, that is your average healthy blood pressure, if you like. Young females tend to have a lower blood pressure than males, and so for example, females in the room, so to speak, listening to this may have a blood pressure lower than that. So you might be 105/70, for sake of argument, as a guess. And there you've got your pulse, that's just the heart rate. So what is the mean arterial pressure or the blood pressure? So we tend to think of it as a mean, and it's the cardiac output. And remembering what your cardiac output, that is your heart rate times your stroke volume. So these are down here. So cardiac output is equal to the number of times your heart beats per minute times by the amount of blood coming out of the left ventricle with each heartbeat. So your stroke volume. So your cardiac output is the total amount of blood coming out of your left ventricle every minute. And so your blood pressure is equal to that cardiac output. So the greater the blood coming out, the greater the pressure, obviously. And that's multiplied by the total peripheral resistance. And that just means how are your peripheral arterioles as a whole, how dilated and constricted they are. So as the peripheral resistance goes up, your pressure goes up. And how does that peripheral resistance go up? Well, it happens when your arterioles constrict. So their diameter gets smaller. So therefore, less blood can pass through the arterioles. So therefore, obviously, more blood is left in the arterial system, increasing that mean arterial pressure. So your total peripheral resistance is dependent on the ability of your arterioles primarily to dilate and constrict. What is the typical immediate effect on blood pressure when a person rapidly stands up? So only one of these options is correct. Press pause, have a little bit of a think about it. Is it A, B, C, or D? Okay, so hopefully you said option B is the correct answer. So your blood pressure decreases initially and then increases back to normal. So in other words, when you stand up, there's a transient drop in your blood pressure due to that momentary delay in the adjustment of blood flow, because blood is obviously pooling. You've got gravity, so less is going to your brain and less is being pumped out, less is returning to the heart, and that's followed by an increase as the body works to normalize that blood pressure. And like I said, it drops due to that gravity effect, if you like. So blood pressure decreases, then increases. So how does the body quickly adjust for a blood pressure drop, for example, upon standing? So this is related to the previous question, what actually happens? So again, look at the options, press pause, and then we'll go through them. And this time more than one option may be correct. Okay, so let's have a little look through the options. So hopefully you thought that options B and C were correct, but we'll go through them and let's hope you do. So A, releasing hormones that increase metabolic rate. Well, the main hormone that regulates your metabolic rate is thyroxine, and that doesn't have a major effect on blood pressure. Part Option B, activation of the sympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system increases heart rate, increases contractility. So you increase your heart rate, your stroke volume, so you increase your cardiac output and therefore increase your blood pressure. And that is the option for option C, by increasing your heart rate and your heart muscle contractility. So D, increasing blood volume to enhance cardiac output. No, it doesn't do that in the short term, but it does do it in the long term. And does it cause rapid peripheral vasodilation? No, it doesn't. It causes, so your sympathetic nervous system causes peripheral vasoconstriction to elevate your blood pressure. Okay, so now we're thinking about this a little bit more. What are the factors that influence blood pressure? Well, you've got your cardiac effects. So you've got things such as your heart rate and your contractility and your heart contractility. And of course, your nervous system, your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system influence that heart rate and contractility. How is it actually measured or regulated? Short term, this is how it works. Sympathetic effect on the cardiac system. So that's your baroreceptor reflex. You've then got the longer term control of blood pressure, and that's through your blood volume. And you do that by reabsorbing sodium and water via your kidneys, and increasing your sodium and water increases your blood volume. And by increasing your blood volume, you increase your blood pressure. And that is called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, hence RAAS or RAAS. And then you've got your long-term, again, you've got these hormones that we've talked about, so your renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Also, you have antidiuretic hormone, so ADH, that helps to keep you hydrated, obviously, and so that reabsorbs water. And you have insulin, which is also involved in maintaining blood volume. So if you have too much insulin, you reabsorb too much sodium and more water follows that, increasing your blood volume and blood pressure. But we have the counteraction of the RAAS system is atrial natriuretic peptide. So as you should be able to work out from its name, it's released from the atria and it causes natriuresis. In other words, it causes you to wee out more sodium. And what follows that sodium? Water. So you lose blood volume and therefore your blood pressure drops. So that's atrial natriuretic peptide. And that is stimulated basically when you have an increase in blood volume or too much blood volume, your atria becomes stretched. That stretch causes the release of ANP. ANP causes sodium and water to be secreted or released from your kidneys and passed out through urine, and therefore your blood volume and blood pressure drop. So thinking about that short-term regulation through your cardiac regulation, we have baroreceptors or mechanoreceptors, or pressure receptors is probably the easiest way to think about them. And these pressure receptors are present in our high pressure zones and they respond very quickly. So these receptors provide critical information about blood going to the brain and to the body. And so these are present within your carotid sinus, and within your aortic arch. So you've got the one in your aortic arch, which is kind of monitoring the blood pressure going to the systemic circulation, and you've got the one in the carotid, the carotid sinus, the carotid baroreceptor, which is kind of monitoring the amount of blood and the pressure of blood going up to your brain. And so if you have a decrease in your blood pressure, both of these sensors, baroreceptors, will detect that drop in pressure. And therefore, because there's a drop in pressure, there'll be a drop in the amount of firing, the number of action potentials. That transmits that information to your brain stem, okay, and to your cardiovascular control center. And at your cardiovascular control center, because your blood pressure has dropped, we want to increase it. So your sympathetic nervous system kicks in, increases heart rate, increases stroke volume, which increases cardiac output and increases your blood pressure. It will also cause peripheral vasoconstriction. And by causing peripheral vasoconstriction, that means your peripheral resistance goes up, which again increases that blood pressure. So that was your short-term regulation. What about your long-term regulation of blood pressure? Well, that is done, if you remember, through your renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, or your RAAS. And so this takes longer. So it's hours to years, because it's just ongoing all of the time, presuming your kidneys and other systems are working fine. But if you have a drop in blood pressure on a longer term basis, you therefore get decreased perfusion of your kidneys. In other words, there's less blood passing into your kidneys because you've got peripheral vasoconstriction, because your blood pressure has dropped, so therefore less blood goes to your kidneys and you get less filtrate being formed, because remember, your kidneys form a filtrate and clean your blood. And if this is then detected by the kidneys, so the kidneys detect that drop in pressure and the decreased amount of sodium in the filtrate, and cause the release of a hormone called renin. Renin works on on a protein called angiotensinogen, which is made in the liver, and that renin converts angiotensinogen into angiotensin 1. In the lungs, angiotensin 1 is converted to angiotensin 2. This is probably one of the systems I really want you to get focused into your head. The enzyme angiotensin converting enzyme is the enzyme that converts angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Why is this important? Because by inhibiting this enzyme, you are making less angiotensin 2, and therefore you will actually lower your blood pressure. Now, keep that in the back of your mind for now. You may know people who are taking what are called ACE inhibitors. ACE inhibitors block this enzyme or decrease its activity, therefore meaning you have less angiotensin 2. What does angiotensin 2 do? Well, its main purpose in life is to increase your blood pressure. So, angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors will make less angiotensin 2, so angiotensin 2 will not do as much increasing of blood pressure. But let's presume you're not on an ACE inhibitor. So what does angiotensin 2 do? Well, it works on your thirst center and makes you thirsty, and therefore you drink, and therefore your blood volume goes up and your blood pressure goes up. It works on your adrenal gland to release the hormone aldosterone, hence the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Aldosterone is released into the blood, it's a hormone, and it travels to the kidneys, where it causes both sodium reabsorption and then water follows that. So it increases your blood volume. It does other things as well, but this is what you need to know in terms of regulation. Very important, massive role. This hormone plays a huge role in regulating your blood volume and therefore blood pressure. Angiotensin 2 causes arterial vasoconstriction, which of course, by constricting the arterioles, you increase your blood pressure. It causes the release of antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, which causes water reabsorption, therefore increasing your blood volume. And all of those things together increase your blood volume, increase your peripheral resistance, and therefore increase your blood volume and blood pressure and bring it back to normal. And so you have this whole cycle being regulated the whole time, depending on your blood volume and your blood pressure status. So we now know we've got a high pressure situation which works short term, so that's your baroreceptor system linked in with your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. We've also got your long-term blood pressure regulation, so that's your renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. But we also have what's called a low pressure system, and this is where we have a pressure receptor or baroreceptor reflex in our low pressure zones, for example our atria. And try and think back to what hormone did I mention that comes or is released from the atria that helps to reduce your blood pressure. That is atrial natriuretic hormone, or atrial natriuretic peptide. So what happens? This low pressure system basically detects the fullness of your system. So it says, have I got enough blood in my system, or have I got too much blood in my system? So it really detects elevated venous pressure or atrial pressure, and its aim is to reduce blood volume and blood pressure. So whereas the other two systems were kind of regulating blood volume and blood pressure, often by increasing it, this one kind of says, whoa, I've got too much blood volume. I want to get rid of it. And so it tries to reduce the blood volume and therefore blood pressure. So if you have an increase in your blood volume, that means you get increased blood returning to your heart, and it means you therefore have increased stretch of your atria. So your low pressure receptors are activated, and with that activation we get the release of ANP, atrial natriuretic peptide. And what does atrial natriuretic peptide do? Can you remember? Just quickly think, press pause and think. ANP, what's it do? It causes sodium to be excreted via the kidneys, water follows, and therefore it helps or serves to decrease your blood volume, and therefore it helps to mitigate any high blood volume and blood pressure situations. So it tries to reduce your blood volume and therefore tries to reduce your blood pressure. So, quick review question for you, and we have talked about this, so I really hope you can get this one. There's a type of drug called ACE inhibitors, and they're used to control high blood pressure. What is the primary way ACE inhibitors work to control this elevated blood pressure? So read each of these options and tell me which is the primary one. I just want one option. Okay, so let's have a little look through them. Do ACE inhibitors promote sodium excretion in the kidneys? Let's have a look. Well, ACE inhibitors block this enzyme ACE, which means you get decreased angiotensin II. Does this promote sodium excretion? No. This is not the primary mechanism by which ACE inhibitors work. Do they directly release or block the release of aldosterone? No, they don't. Okay, by blocking, they don't directly block the release of aldosterone. They're stopping the production of angiotensin II, which will go on to meaning there is less aldosterone released. Do they inhibit the conversion of angiotensin I to angiotensin II? Bing! That is their primary mechanism of action, which will, of course, lead to decreased angiotensin II, decreased thirst, decreased aldosterone, decreased vasoconstriction, decreased ADH. Do they decrease heart rate and contractility? No, that is not their major method of action either. Okay, so the key thing that they do is they inhibit the conversion of angiotensin I to angiotensin II, which in turn reduces the amount of water and sodium that is being reabsorbed and decreases arterial vasoconstriction.